Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Today we are tackling a scenario that is, I honestly think, one of the cruelest paradoxes in, well, the entire field of mental health. It's a story we see in the research all the time. And if you haven't gone through it, it sounds almost counterintuitive. But if you have,
Yeah.
it's probably why you're staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. wondering, what is wrong with you?
It really is the classic be careful what you wish for scenario, isn't it?
It is. So let's set the stage. The source material paints this really vivid picture. You've been struggling. Maybe it's that, the heavy, wet blanket of depression. Or maybe it's anxiety that feels like a humming wire in your chest.
And you finally do the brave thing.
Right. You go to a doctor, you ask for help, and you start a pretty standard course of antidepressants.
Which is a huge step. I mean, just getting to that appointment is often the hardest part of the whole journey.
Exactly. And at first, you think, okay, I did it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's working. The crying spells stop. That crushing weight of hopelessness, it starts to lift. You aren't drowning anymore.
Yep.
But then the fog rolls in.
The fog. Yeah, this is such a distinct phenomenon.
You're sitting there, maybe staring at your computer screen. You are technically happier, or at least, you're not sad, but you are completely unable to work. You feel present, but not really there. It's like you've been zombified. The sadness is gone, but your ability to focus, to function, is just evaporated.
And we are seeing this more and more in the literature. It's this very specific intersection where treating depression actually seems to cause ADHD symptoms to just skyrocket.
Things like executive dysfunction, procrastination.
Exactly. Lack of focus, all of it.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack why that happens. Why does fixing one problem sometimes feel like it's breaking another? And I think most importantly, if you feel this way, if you feel calm but useless, does it mean you're unfixable?
And let's just say the short answer to that is absolutely not. If you are listening to this and you're nodding along feeling like you're technically better but practically dysfunctional, I want to validate that right now. You aren't failing therapy. You aren't broken. What you are experiencing is a very specific chemical reaction between a medication and a unique brain type. It is biology. It is not a character flaw.
Okay, so let's get into that biology. Because on the surface, it just doesn't make sense. If I'm taking medicine to make my brain work better, why does it feel like my brain has just stopped working? What's going on under the hood?
So to understand this, we have to look at the big two neurotransmitters, which are serotonin and dopamine.
Right.
Now, most common antidepressants are SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and their entire job, put simply, is to increase the amount of available serotonin in your brain.
Right. Serotonin is the well-being molecule. It handles mood, sleep, everything is okay, chemical.
Exactly. But the brain is this really delicate ecosystem, It's all connected. You can't just flood one area without it affecting another. And the research describes this fascinating relationship between serotonin and dopamine. You can kind of think of them like a seesaw.
A seesaw. Okay, I like that visual. Let's unpack that.
Well, on a playground seesaw, when one side goes up, the other side has to go down, right? In the brain, specifically in certain neural circuits, these two chemicals can have what we call a reciprocal relationship. So when you take a medication that really boosts serotonin, pushing that side of the seesaw way up to stabilize your mood, dopamine activity can sometimes drop. The other side of the seesaw goes down.
And here is where it gets really, really tricky for anyone with ADHD. Because ADHD is, at its core, a condition of dopamine deficiency.
Precisely. That is the absolute crux of the conflict. The ADHD brain is already, in a sense, starting for dopamine. Dopamine is the focus fuel. It's what drives motivation, reward, the actual get up and go.
Okay.
So imagine your tank for that focus fuel is already on fumes. Then you take a medication that sort of accidentally drains that tank even further to fill up the serotonin tank.
Sure, you end up in this complete paradox. You feel happier because your serotonin is high, but you physically cannot get off the couch because your dopamine, your drive is just gone.
That is the zombie feeling. The mood is managed, but the engine is dead. Clinically, sometimes you'll hear it called SSRI-induced indifference.
SSRI-induced indifference. Wow, that's a powerful phrase. It's not that you can't do the work.
No.
It's that you just don't care.
You just don't care. And that indifference is so dangerous because it's quiet. When you're depressed, you feel the pain of it. It screams at you. But when you're indifferent, you watch the deadline pass and think, oh, well, I'll deal with it later.
But later never comes.
It never comes because the chemical drive to initiate the task never arrives.
That makes so much sense. But it's not just about the raw chemicals, is it? There's also a behavioral shift. Sources talk about something called emotional blunting.
Yes, and this is a really subtle but hugely impactful side effect. Antidepressants, they're designed to stabilize your mood. They are excellent at shaving off the extreme lows of depression. That's what we want.
Right.
But for some people, they can also shave off the highs. They kind of flatten the whole curve.
Which, for a neurotypical brain, probably just feels like relief. It's peace.
Exactly. Stability is the goal. But for an ADHD brain, that stability can be a complete disaster for productivity.
Because, and this is so relatable, the ADHD brain runs on a very specific kind of fuel. It's not just dopamine. It's urgency. It's interest. It's novelty.
Or panic.
Or panic, yes. The sources talk about how we often only do things because they are interesting, new, or just terrifyingly urgent.
We actually rely on that spike of adrenaline and dopamine to jumpstart our executive functions. Think about that college paper you wrote at 3 a.m. Why did you do it then?
Because the panic of the deadline finally forced my brain to turn on.
Yes. The panic was the key that turned the ignition. It wasn't discipline, it was terror.
It was terror, yeah.
So now, what happens if you introduce a medication that blunts that emotional response? The panic doesn't hit as hard. You know the deadline is coming, but you don't feel that jolt of urgency. The panic monster just keeps sleeping.
And without that emotional spike, the engine just, it never turns on.
It just sits there.
That's terrifying. It's like you lose your anxiety, which is great, but then you realize your anxiety was the only thing keeping you employed.
It's a massive double-edged sword. There's a term for this that I find incredibly useful: load-bearing anxiety.
Load-bearing anxiety. I love that. Like a load-bearing wall in a house.
Exactly. It's structural, it is not healthy, it's exhausting, it spikes your cortisol, but it's holding the roof up. For many people with unmanaged ADHD, anxiety acts as this crude, makeshift executive function system.
It's a mental check-in system.
Right. The racing thoughts. Did I check the calendar? Did I send that email? Am I late? It's miserable to live with, but it kind of works. It keeps you on track.
It herds the cats.
It herds the cats, yeah. So when an antidepressant successfully quiets that anxiety, which, clinically is a success, it removes the herding dog, the racing thoughts stop.
But now
the forgetfulness, the time blindness, the disorganization, they're all left to just roam free without that anxiety to keep them in check.
So you're sitting there perfectly calm, just watching your life fall apart because you don't care enough to fix it.
In a nutshell, yes. You've removed the symptom, but you've also removed the scaffolding that was holding your entire life together.
Okay, so we've got the seesaw draining our fuel and emotional blunting removing our urgency. But the source material also brings up a very physical barrier. It calls it the lethargy trap.
This is so important because we often think of side effects as purely mental. But many antidepressants, especially in the first few months, have a sedative effect. They make you feel physically heavy.
And for anyone with ADHD, we all know about the wall of awful, that invisible barrier between doing nothing and doing something.
The activation energy needed to start a task.
Right. And the source makes this great point. If you have ADHD, that wall's already there. It's already 5 feet high. But if your medication is making you physically sleepy, that wall just became 10 feet high.
It becomes a battle on two fronts. You're fighting your own brain's executive dysfunction, and now you're also fighting a body that just wants to take a nap.
Productivity becomes almost impossible.
Yeah.
And speaking of naps, we have to talk about sleep. Because I think a lot of people assume, oh, the meds make me tired, so I'll sleep better. That should help. But that's not what happens, is it?
Not at all. It's about sleep architecture. It's not just quantity, it's quality. And the source highlights that SSRIs can specifically interfere with REM sleep.
REM sleep. That's the deep restorative stuff.
It's the mental filing cabinet. It's when your brain processes emotions, memories. But crucially, it's when the brain resets the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the CEO of the brain. Focus, decision-making, impulse control.
Right. So if your medication is messing with your sleep quality, even if you're unconscious for 8 hours, the CEO doesn't really show up for work the next morning. Your prefrontal cortex isn't fully online. So no matter how well your mood is managed, your ADHD symptoms, your ability to focus, they're going to be unmanageable the next day.
It creates this kind of cognitive fog where you just can't grab onto a thought.
Exactly. It's like trying to run through waist-deep water.
It is just layer upon layer of difficulty. And there's one more layer the source mentions that I found really profound. It's about the reward system.
Anhedonia.
Anhedonia. The inability to feel pleasure. Now, we usually hear about this as a symptom of depression, But the source argues it can also be a side effect of the medication itself.
This is where the difference between a neurotypical brain and an ADHD brain just becomes so stark. Think about a boring task like folding laundry or clearing an inbox.
Okay.
A neurotypical brain actually gets a tiny micro hit of dopamine for completing that. It's a little good job from the brain.
A little chemical gold star.
Yes. Task complete. Here's a cookie. But the ADHD brain,
Something.
it gets nothing. There is no natural chemical reward for boring tasks, which is why we hate doing them. You're working for free, chemically speaking.
Right.
Now, imagine you take a medication that dampens your reward system even further. It raises the threshold for what your brain even considers rewarding. The whole effort to reward ratio just breaks completely.
The source asks this question that just sums it up perfectly. Why answer an email if your brain gives you absolutely zero chemical satisfaction for doing it?
That's the core of it. Motivation isn't just willpower, it's neurochemistry. And if that neurological payoff is gone, the motivation evaporates. You're not being lazy, you're being chemically denied the satisfaction of completion.
I want to pivot here for a second because there's a twist in the source material that I think is a massive aha moment for so many people. We've been talking about treating depression and making ADHD worse, but what if the diagnosis itself is the problem?
This is such a critical distinction. The source brings up this concept of depressive fatigue versus ADHD burnout.
Because they look the same from the outside, don't they?
They look nearly identical. If you've spent years masking your ADHD, struggling to keep up, feeling inadequate, you eventually hit a wall. You enter a state of just profound exhaustion and hopelessness. And to a doctor seeing you for 15 minutes, that looks exactly like clinical depression.
We're tired. You feel hopeless.
Yeah, so they prescribe an antidepressant. But if the root cause isn't a lack of serotonin, but rather untreated ADHD burnout, the antidepressant is, and I love this analogy from the source, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Wow. That's a vivid image.
It might numb the surface pain a little. It might make you feel a bit less sad about your situation, but it does not fix the underlying fracture, which is the executive dysfunction.
So you're not suffering because your mood is wrong. You're suffering because you don't have the support you need to function.
Exactly. And in those cases, the source says treating the depression only creates numbness. But treating the ADHD, that actually lifts the mood.
Because you're treating the cause.
You're treating the root cause. When you give the brain the executive function support it needs, the hopelessness just recedes because you can actually handle your life again. The depression evaporates when the overwhelm is managed.
That is a huge paradigm shift. It means we have to be so careful about what we're actually treating. Is it the symptom or the source?
Absolutely. We have to treat the patient, not just the checklist on a clipboard.
Okay, so we have painted a pretty foggy picture here. The seesaw is kipped, the urgency is gone, the wall is high, the reward is missing. But we promised we wouldn't leave our listeners there. The source is very clear. This is not a dead end.
Absolutely not. And I really want to reiterate this. You do not have to choose between being depressed or being functional. That is a false choice. You don't have to sacrifice your entire personality just to save your mood.
So if I'm listening to this and realizing, oh my gosh, this is me, I'm the zombie, what do I do? What's the first step?
Step one is data. Doctors love data. The problem is patients often go in and just say, I feel bad or I'm tired. That's really hard to treat.
Right.
The source suggests tracking your symptoms specifically. Think mood rating versus focus rating.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. Keep a log for a week. My mood is a 7 out of 10. I'm not crying. I'm not despairing. But my focus is a 2 out of 10. I haven't answered an email in 3 days. That specific discrepancy is a huge clue for your psychiatrist.
It separates the variables.
It proves that the serotonin is doing its job, but the dopamine has totally crashed.
Okay, so I bring the data. Then what? What can the doctor actually do? Do I have to stop the meds?
Well, not necessarily. That's a common misconception. The source highlights what's called the augmentation or add-on strategy.
Combination therapy.
Right. It's about balancing the seesaw. Your doctor might suggest adding a medication specifically to address the dopamine deficiency like Wellbutrin, or even a stimulant, while keeping the antidepressant to handle the serotonin.
So you fill the focus tank without emptying the mood tank.
That's the goal. It seems so logical when you say it out loud. You don't have to swap one for the other. You just have to calibrate both. It's all about calibration. It's chemistry, and chemistry requires balance.
Okay, there's a very, very important warning in the source material that we have to mention here.
Yes, this is crucial. If you're listening and thinking the meds are the problem, I'm flushing them right now, please, please stop. Do not do that.
Never stop cold turkey.
Never. The withdrawal from SSRIs can be severe brain zaps, vertigo, intense mood swings, and honestly, it can make the executive dysfunction 10 times worse because your brain is just in chaos.
So we do.
You schedule a specific appointment and use the language from the source. Tell your doctor you want to discuss worsening executive dysfunction or cognitive blunting.
Worsening executive dysfunction. Got it. Write that down. It's not just, I feel lazy. It's a specific clinical side effect.
Exactly. You are advocating for your brain's unique chemistry. As the source says, it's a journey of finding the right key for your specific lock.
I love that idea. You just have to keep trying keys.
And realizing that if the current key makes you feel like a zombie, it's just the wrong key. It doesn't mean the door is unopenable.
So what does this all mean for us? We've unpacked the biology, the behavior, the diagnosis. It seems like the big takeaway is that mental health is just not a one-size-fits-all game.
It really isn't. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces us to ask a really provocative question about what well-being even is. We often define mental health in our society as the absence of symptoms, the absence of sadness, the absence of panic.
But is that enough? Is a plant healthy just because it's not wilting?
That's the question. Is true well-being just being numb to the pain? Or does it require the ability to engage with the world? Does it require that drive, that dopamine, that spark that makes us who we are?
That's such a powerful thought, because if we treat the mind, but we silence the drive, are we really healing?
Exactly. We have to make sure that in our quest for peace, we aren't silencing the very thing that makes us feel alive. We need to aim for thriving, not just surviving.
A calibration of happiness and drive. That is definitely something to sit with.
Eh.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive. We hope it gave you some clarity through the fog.
Take care of your unique brains, everyone.
We'll see you next time.